Okay, so for today, we will talk about the remaining activities in the action research cycle, namely planning, taking action, and evaluating action. And then after this, I will give you some notes on how to go about your meta learning, meaning how do you go about your content reflection, your process reflection, and your premise reflections. So that will more or less give you a complete sense of what you will be doing when you take your insider action research a few terms from now. So just to remind you, this is how the action research cycle looks like. So you begin with constructing together with your collaborators. And then once the issue is clear, you develop an action plan, execute it, and then just like any other plan that you do for your companies, you will have to take stock of what happened. Okay, you must evaluate your action and see whether you were able to meet the goals that you set for yourself at the beginning of the cycle. And then after that, you use the insights that you got from the first cycle, okay, by doing some kind of reflections, no? And then use that to help you go into the next cycle. It means that you will have to take a look at the issue again. Does it need to be refined? Uh, did you look at the issue incorrectly the first time, and therefore you will have to look into the issue more closely this time so that you have a better diagnosis of the situation, and then the cycle continues. All right. But for today, we will take a look at the next activity, which is planning. So planning is basically involves the following activities. So one will be setting goals in relation to the issue or problem that you identified. Second, you must jointly identify activities needed to attain these goals. Again, the collaboration must still be there. No? It's not the collaboration does not stop after you identify the issue. The planning of the actions must also be collaborative so that there will be so that the people involved, the stakeholders in the organization, will have some kind of ownership that will allow the action plan to be implemented more smoothly, we're hoping. And then number three, it's important that you formulate SMART objectives. I think you learned this in basic management. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound objectives. Now, if you're not able to do this, then it becomes difficult for you to execute your plan because you might be guessing, now, what do we need to do? That's why it has to be very specific what your goals are. And then also when you go about evaluating your action at the end of the cycle, it will be difficult for you to gauge the success of your action if you don't have certain targets, okay, or indicators of success. So those are the things that are important when you do planning. A goal without a plan is just a wish. So we must be able to come up with very specific activities or actions to set the stage for the attainment of that goal. What are the key elements of a plan? Okay, these are very important because sometimes I see drafts of action research proposals where the plan is very general. So I don't get a sense of whether this will actually help address the issue. So when you prepare a plan, it's important that you have those objectives. So for instance, you want to bring down the error rate in your company, or you want to bring down absenteeism rates. Okay, it might help for you to be able to say that from 20% absenteeism, we would like to bring that down to 2%, okay, per month, something like that. No? If it lends itself to such kind of quantification. But sometimes there are certain goals that are quite difficult to quantify, but still you must be able to come up with certain indicators. All right. Number two, a plan must have specific activities. And then the activities must be, there must be somebody accountable, okay, for undertaking specific activities. So that's where the person responsible comes in. Now, if you think that it's important to also spell out what resources are needed so that you can organize things properly, it might help to also indicate what resources are needed. Now, this is important also if you're advocating, let's say, for a particular change initiative that requires a budget or certain resources. So, when you present your proposal to your boss, this should almost always be part of the plan that you're preparing. And then finally, there must be a timetable so that you will not be executing the plan indefinitely. And there must also be deadlines so that the people responsible will know when they are supposed to submit their accountabilities. Otherwise, you might not be able to effectively undertake your initiative. So in this slide, which you can take a look at later, again in detail, I gave you examples of portions of plans prepared by some of my MAR students ito last term. This one is by Rommel. I don't know if he was your classmate. So this one is still very general now, but you get a sense of what needed to be done for the intervention to succeed. So here he listed down the different activities that needs to be done for the project development phase of his action research, and then the person in charge, the person responsible. Now take note that when you prepare a plan, it will help to have a summary table like this one, but the plan should not just be the table itself. There must be an accompanying narrative to explain each one of those, let's say, milestones and activities using his terminology. No? So when you talk about creating the project management team, there must be a narrative, certain paragraphs to explain what this constitutes. All right. So the summary table is simply to give us an idea of what the plan is at a glance, but the details must still be spelled out in the narrative. This is still from the same paper, so I just selected the phase 4, phase 5, and phase 6 projects. So again, you have the different activities, what it involves, and who is the person responsible. All right. He did not choose to do deadlines, but instead indicated timetables. So I will give you a certain leeway in terms of what you think might be appropriate for your purposes. Now, this is the summary table prepared by Giancarlo Villanueva, also one of my students last term. So here he identified, ang ginawa niya goal, no? But under goal, he identified certain activities like analyze, planning, approval. Again, you will see that it's quite different from the previous plan, but maybe because in BSP, that's how they do it. No? So I'll give you some kind of leeway. But the key elements here would be the activities listed under the column titled Action Plan. So you will see that it's very clear what are the things that need to be done, then the timetable, okay, 1 month, a month, 2 months, etc., and then the people involved. Note here that he identified all of the people involved for that set of activities. My preference really is that for specific activities, there must be a person responsible so that you know exactly who to contact now, who will be accountable for it. So while this is a good guide for them in their company, it might be also helpful for you to be able to pinpoint, okay, who in particular is responsible for this particular activity. So is that clear? No, that is something that I hope you will be able to do for your own planning. Now, this one was done by my IAR advisee last year, almost 2 years ago, before I took my leave. So you will see that the planned action is quite similar but different. So I'm not forcing you into a box. These are the formats probably that are useful for them in their companies, and therefore this is what they did. What you can see here again is that there is a set of activities. and then there is in charge. Although I gave her feedback before, no, that when you put in charge, if you identify 4 people in charge, then who takes the ultimate accountability? Now, if you want to put in people who are involved, you can do that. But you must also pinpoint from among the 3 or 4 people involved in the activity who will be accountable. So in your case, I will be looking for that now, who will be ultimately accountable, even if there are several people involved in the activity. Now, what is different here is that she identified specific outputs for all of those activities, which might be very useful because no, that once the output has been delivered, then it's some sort of an indication, okay, that the plan has been implemented properly. Okay? So according to Gandhi, the future depends on what you do today, which brings us to the next activity, which is taking action. Okay, taking action is the collaborative implementation of plans and interventions. Again, the term collaborative, because this is insider action research. Since you already have the plan, this is actually very easy. All you need to do now is to write down in the paragraphs in your paper what actually happened. No? So you spell out the actual events that took place based on the structure of the plan that you presented earlier. So if you have, let's say, several key activities in that plan, then make sure that you are able to account for the major ones in the taking action. It is possible that you might want to account for all of the specific activities, or you might want to structure your narrative along the lines of groups of activities so that it does not become too difficult to read. So again, there is certain flexibility in terms of how you present it, as long as it is coherent, okay, from the point of view of the reader. So this is actually the easiest because you simply have to tell the story of what actually happened. Now, the last activity in that cycle will be evaluating action. Okay, this involves examining the action plan's outcomes, both intended and unintended. What do we mean by this? Intended outcomes refer to those that you anticipated would happen based on your plan. So for instance, you want to reduce customer complaints or to improve turnaround times. Now you can take a look after after you execute your plan. Did you reach your targets? Okay, did you reach, let's say, 2% customer complaints from 10% before? Were you able to improve turnaround time from, let's say, 3 days to 30 minutes, something like that, no? So now you can see why it is important that you have very specific performance indicators in the plans, because that it will actually help facilitate the evaluation of your action, particularly for the intended outcomes. But note that sometimes, in many cases, there are also unintended outcomes, meaning that the things that you did not plan for that will actually also emerge as a result of the process of executing a plan. So for instance, when you execute the plan, you're collaborating with other people. One of the things that you will notice is that people become excited about things, no? Or that they become more stronger. Maybe you're a unit in your company, you become more solid as a group. No? Those are examples of unintended outcomes. While you might be addressing a particular technical issue, there might be social, let's say, benefits from the process of doing action research. On the other hand, unintended outcomes could also be negative. So for instance, you might actually have been able to bring down, let's say, to remove the problem or to increase your quota, let's say, by 50%, okay, which is a good indicator of intended outcomes, but people might have actually gotten sick. Okay, they might have experienced health problems, or many of them actually resigned because they think that the company just takes so much from them without getting back in return. So that would be an example of the intended outcome being met, okay, meeting the sales quota, but there might be negative outcomes in terms of the health conditions of people or of their desire to stay in the company. So those things must also be accounted for after the first research cycle. All right. Now I'm showing you an example of a Pareto chart that Sarah Jane Ibasco prepared after uh, she and her collaborators implemented their action research. No? So I did not show here anymore the original Pareto chart, but it basically tells you that the occurrence of the problem actually decreased substantially compared to the original. But you will only be able to do this if you have certain baseline information. So in this case, you already collected data prior to implementing the intervention. And therefore, after the intervention, she also collected data again and was able to compare the one that you're seeing here on screen to the baseline data that she presented. So this is a very good way of assessing the success of your action research intervention. Now, you will see here that she also collected comments from people about their experience in implementing their online sheet monitoring intervention. So she interviewed people from sales, the drivers, the admin people, the HR people, etc., and was also able to get positive and negative comments from them. So this is also part of evaluating action. So it's not everything that can be quantified that should be included in this particular section of your paper. It helps to also include qualitative indicators. Okay, because if people feel good, that might be difficult to quantify, but it is a very important element, also a goal of action research. If relationships were strengthened as a result, that must also be indicated. All right. So here are the other comments from the finance and admin department. So you can glean from here that the action research of my student, my advisee, actually involved people from different departments because the plan cannot be implemented without the cooperation of different departments. So that makes her action research a little bit complex, but she was able to do it because she held a fairly high position in the company and therefore had access to resources and had a certain amount of authority to coordinate efforts from different departments. Okay. Now, this is very important because after evaluating action, you must go through a process of reflection. Before you try and go into the next cycle immediately, you must stop and take stock of what happened. Huh? You want to take a look at the outcomes and see whether the original constructing fitted, meaning did you diagnose the issue properly? Were there certain things that you probably missed out? You also want to see if the actions you took match the constructing, if the action was taken in an appropriate manner, and then you must also use all of the things that you learned, the insights that you gained from that reflection, so that your next cycle will be done better. Okay, you will have a better appreciation of the situation that will allow you to maybe improve the situation further, or maybe look at the issue once again if you failed in your first try, if things did not go out as intended in the first cycle. By the way, that's fine. In many cases in work or in life, there are certain things that do not happen as expected. That will be fine. It doesn't mean that you fail your IAR, but the important thing is that you're able to demonstrate that you reflected and learned from your mistake. Okay, and then what did you do now in the subsequent cycle so that you are able to address those weaknesses in constructing or in execution. So as Winston Churchill tells us, all men make mistakes, but only wise men learn from their mistakes. So in short, we're hoping that you become wise men and women as a result of insider action research. Now, how will you know if the original constructing fitted? So I listed down certain questions that you would like, that you must answer, and the answer to these questions will actually feed into the reflections that I will show you later. No? So one, check the outcomes of your action. If your intended outcomes were met, then probably the original constructing fitted, meaning that you saw the issue properly, you understood the situation well, and therefore when you executed the plan, things went smoothly. Okay, fine. Then you have to find out, no? So what led to the smooth implementation of the plan? You can also learn, okay, from that. No? But in some cases, you are not able to reach your intended outcomes. Now you want to ask the question, could it be that your original diagnosis of the situation was faulty or insufficient, meaning that the constructing did not fit? Okay? Did you fail to take into account important factors or variables that might have led to an inadequate action plan? Okay, did you fail to anticipate, let's say, resistance from people? Okay, did you fail to take into account the skill level or the competencies of people that, let's say, prevented them from adopting a new technology that you introduced in the company? So all of those different things. Ideally, you would have actually uncovered all of these things when you did your force field analysis or your systems thinking map. But sometimes you still miss out. No? There could be certain blind spots. So this is the time to revisit, okay, your force field analysis, your systems thinking map, and try to see, were there certain things that we miss out. Now that's very important so that now you can take corrective action if needed. Now, what might have led to the faulty diagnosis or insufficient understanding of the situation? So this is where the reflection goes a little bit deeper, beyond the surface level. Might there have been certain assumptions or beliefs that prevented you from spotting important factors or variables? So for instance, might you always be thinking that the reason that you're not meeting your targets is that people are lazy, that they're irresponsible, and therefore your action plan was to control the behavior of people, to set certain standards or deadlines or reporting mechanisms, etc. But maybe that is a false belief or assumption. Maybe the reason for the problem is not the people, but would be the systems or the structures in place. And therefore, because you were blinded by your assumptions, you are not able to address the real cause of the issue. We're hoping that at this point, since the constructing did not fit, that you might now go and do an honest to goodness reflection of your assumptions, beliefs, and the hypothesis, so that you will now come up with a more open mind, something that will allow you to understand the situation better. Or might you have rushed into action before fully understanding the situation? Kasi malapit na yung deadline ng MAR proposal ko. Kasi malapit na yung deadline ng IAR paper. Kasi kinukulit na ako ng aking boss. Something like that, no? But sometimes, when we rush things, we actually make things worse, or it actually takes longer to solve the problem rather than being a little bit more deliberate and more responsible in terms of collecting the data needed. All right. So this all goes back to first person practice and second person practice, etc. Now, another question, was the action taken in an appropriate manner? Again, you check the outcomes. If the outcomes are according to expectations, then surely the execution of the plan was correct. But if you did not achieve your intended outcomes, you want to find out, were there certain weakness or gaps in the implementation plan? Or perhaps, we did not collect enough information. We must wait for a few more weeks to see whether things will settle and maybe the outcomes will be achieved. But you must then ask the question, so what might have caused this situation that is not according to expectations of our plans? Is it due to lack of resources? Is it due to lack of cooperation from concerned parties? Is it due to failure to unfreeze the situation to facilitate the change initiative? So you're seeing here that when you're doing the evaluating action, you're actually already setting the stage for constructing the issue for your second cycle. Because once you're able to answer the questions that I've listed here, these are opportunities to improve the situation, and therefore that could be the new issue for your second cycle. All right. So might there have been some gaps in how you undertook the action research process? Okay, might there have been weaknesses in terms of the collaborative process? Were you forcing your ideas on people and therefore they did not cooperate with you? What could be the reasons for this? Okay, again, answering all of these questions with an open mind and a reflective state will allow you now to come up with the things that you need to do the second cycle better. So according to John Dewey, we do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. So that brings us to the last part of this presentation, which is meta-learning. I actually introduced this to you during our first session when we talk about action research as in general. So meta-learning involves reflecting on the learning process. So as you are engaged in the project, which is the core action research cycle, you must also reflect upon how the project itself is going and what you are learning, which is the thesis action research cycle. Reflection on reflection incorporates the learning process in the action research cycle and enables action research to be more than everyday problem solving. So meta-learning is learning about learning. Okay, what did we gain by going through the action research cycle? Now, in your paper, even for the MAR proposal, there are 3 things that you must include in your reflection. And though these content, process, and premise reflections can basically, can be done by answering the questions that I posed earlier in evaluating action. So content reflection is where you think about the issue, what you think is happening, but in relation to the issue itself, no, not the process, no. So you want to find out, no. So what are the reasons for absenteeism, for late, for people coming in late, no, for punctuality issues. So where can you get your content reflections? It could be by revisiting your force field, your what do you call this, your Ishikawa diagram or your force field analysis or your systems thinking map. Okay, did we come up with a correct assessment, okay, of the causes and sub-causes of the issue? If not, why? No? So that's the question that I posed earlier. So those are the things that you are supposed to include in your content reflection. Okay, the cause and your initial assessment of the cause and effects, etc., and whether they fit, did the constructing fit, in short. No? Now, the second one is process reflection. This is where you think about strategies and procedures and how things are being done. Now you can go back and take a look. Did I do my first person, second person, and third person practice properly? Okay, that is where you go back to be able to populate this particular section. All right. Where we not able to do our action research properly because we did not use an appropriate, let's say, framework, a conceptual framework, or a process framework. No, that could be that could be a reflection in itself. Okay, process reflection could also include reflections about, let's say, power dynamics in the organization, no? And let's say your relationship between the relationship between you and your boss, etc. No? Did it prevent us from actually collaborating well, or conversely, did that close relationship and openness between the two of us, between our team and our boss, facilitate things? Now, that can also be something that you include in your process reflection. And then finally, Premise reflection is where you critique underlying assumptions and perspectives. So this is where, again, you go back to your journal, by your first person practice, your orja, your ladder of inference, your left hand column, etc. Take a look. What did you learn about yourself? Okay, by doing those first person practice, what were the assumptions and beliefs that you held that were either validated or disputed as a result? That now this is where these are the things that you put in your premise reflections. So yun yung ano no, that's the reason why you had to do your journal for first person practice. Now, if you're able to do all of these things, then you're on your way to coming up with a good MAR proposal and hopefully also your IAR paper in the 2 terms from now. So let me end by going back to one of our past lessons about being authentic. In the action research paper, there's a particular section there no, that students have been using. No? They ask about what changed in me, okay, what changed in other people and in the organization. Now, to answer the question about what changed in you, you might want to go back to our lesson on authenticity. So, have I been attentive to data? Because if you were not attentive to data, then you would have missed out on certain information that would have impaired your ability to understand the situation, right? Have I been intelligent in inquiry? Did I engage in second person practice very well? Was I reasonable in making judgments? And was I responsible in making decisions and taking action? All right. So again, note that we're posing a lot of questions that will require you to sit down, to take stock, and to answer the questions so that you learn from your mistakes or so that you can build on your successes if that is the result. Let me end by quoting Tony Robbins. Self-awareness is one of the rarest of human commodities. I don't mean self-consciousness where you're limiting and evaluating yourself. I mean being aware of your own patterns.